Oh God, you are here, and we are here. Lord, may we be here together. May we be conscious of your presence. Awaken us to this vineyard life, oh God, that you've entrusted to us. And may the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, oh God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. It's good to see everyone this morning. So, you all familiar with the stock market crash of 1929, right? Y'all remember that? Or read about it? Anyhow, when the stock market crashed in 1929, a lot of people suddenly found life to be a very, very heavy burden. I mean, some people jumped out of windows. Some people lost their power to make decisions. Others did desperate things to themselves and to others. Do you ever think about why that may be? It's because their God died. Money, property, power, prestige, all of those things has always held an important place in human society, in our history. Our possession of this power, property, prestige, all of that, have a potential to be God's for us because we end up putting our trust and our hope and we put it first in our lives. We devote ourselves to these things and we find our security and identity there. And the real God knows this. God has infused in us, in our DNA, the ability to discover our deepest selves and our identity in God and trust God or reject this gift and substitute it for something else. It's just what humans do. It's true, right? The 10 Commandments that we just read are a gift, an actual gift of those who had been set free. They had been in bondage. They had been in slavery in Egypt. They had been set free. And they have now have this land, and it's to show them how to keep their freedom, how to experience the fullness of life. It is a desire of God who's given them everything to say, look, this is how you live. This is how you are to live and have life, to be who you were created to be. Today's gospel reveals God's free offer of Jesus himself. His loving, generous, grace-filled invitation to life. And some folks' decision to choose an alternative. Jesus, again, like almost every Sunday, is confronting the religious leaders of his time. Because the religious leaders had been entrusted with the spiritual care of God's people, but instead have made it all about themselves. Unfortunately, many of them saw it as a way of getting prestige and power, and to rule over others through religious law that actually chokes the very life out of people. They turned away from grace, and they switched from being guardians of this life to being owners. They wanted to possess God rather than God possessing them. And Jesus had a difficulty getting through to them. They were so sure of themselves and their standing in their community that they were inflexible and unyielding to everything he did or everything he said. So he did what Jesus always does. He scolded them. No, he once again told them a story in an attempt to reach them, in an attempt to awaken these people, in an attempt to get them back in life. Because they were living in death. Because they were striving, they had created and made these little gods. And so he tells this story of the vineyard, this beautiful story of how the Israels, the Hebrew people were entrusted, essentially, right? But these religious that kept killing the prophets, and eventually they killed their son. Right? Jesus tells this story of this vineyard. And here's one of the main points that I think we should take away from this, is this, in this story that we just read. One is that God trusts people. That God trusts you. That God trusts me. That God trusts us. And these religious leaders took God's abundance entrusted to them, entrusted to their care. They took it for granted. And they acted like owners instead of participants with God, instead of tenants in God's dream. Jesus was reminding the religious leaders that God is extravagantly generous. Everything we have, life itself, is a gift. God's vast estate is what we are in. It's all God's. Your breath, my breath, the air we breathe, the sun, everything. We've been invited into something good and beautiful from a good and beautiful God. Everything, he was saying, has been graced and given to them. They share in it all in their abundance. All he wanted them to do was be grateful and to live in that place and to share into that life with one another. Not to possess it, take control of it, and make it their God. See, there was a church next door to a supermarket. I may have shared this with y'all before, I don't remember. But since the church was short on parking spaces, the supermarket was closed on Sundays, and so the church leaders asked the owner of the supermarket for permission to park in the lot. And so the owner's response was, sure, that's cool, it's fine. You're welcome to use it for 51 weeks a year. And they're like, what about the other week? And he said, oh, that week, said the owner, he said, I'm going to chain off the lot so that you will always remember that the lot belongs to me and not to the church. This is the point that Jesus was trying to make with these religious leaders. It's God's. And God trusts you. Well, what are you doing with it? See, the tenants, if you remember in this story, the tenants, they were privileged. The vineyard was equipped with everything they needed. The tenants have not only failed to follow the agreement with their owner that they made, they displayed a deep selfishness and scheming to keep all of the fruits of the vineyard for themselves. And here's the key point. Jesus claims that in doing so, that they themselves have excluded themselves from the kingdom. They excluded themselves from the kingdom. They were refusing to be what God created them to be. See, this is extremely important to Jesus because there is no such thing as an ownership society in God's dream, in God's kingdom. People and relationships are what matter most to God. God has abundantly given and entrusted life and the care of all people in creation to us. And all God asks for is us to respond. God asks us to partner with God in God's dream for humanity. The vineyard was set up by God. You all ever been to the vineyards? They're beautiful, aren't they? You ever been in Northern California? I used to live. I have them in my backyard. They're amazing and beautiful. It's just gorgeous. All these grapes everywhere, and you can go and pick up. Oh, it's awesome. This is what God has invited us into, this life, this vineyard life. And all he wants us to do is respond out of gratitude and awe and never forget who we are. And you know, sin, they say sin. One of the best definitions I ever heard for sin is refusing to be who we were created to be. And he wants us to partner with him in his dream for humanity. Being grateful, open-minded, open-hearted, living with gratitude. To say thank you. And you know, sometimes, have you ever noticed, at least it is this way with me, that when I get all caught up in my own little world, I tend to be less grateful. It's all about me, right? And if it doesn't go the way I want it to or the way I should, then I'm not all that grateful. I don't have much gratitude. It's when I stop and slow down and begin to think and look at the gifts in which God has entrusted me that I can live with gratitude. And here's the other thing. It's to be generous and open-handed, open-hearted. You know, I think the truth is that we have a need to give. I think we're pre-wired to give. And I'm not talking about your money, unless that, of course, is the very thing that you're clenching and holding on to and grasping and clinging to, and you're putting your life, your hope, your faith, your trust into that. If that is indeed what it is, then you need to open your hand and let it go. You have a need to release that, release its grip over you so that you can experience more fully the kingdom life. See, we have a need to give because we tend to hoard, we tend to hold on, we tend to cling, we tend to trust. If I have gifts, they're not just for me, right? My talents or whatever, how wonderful I think I am, it's not all about me. Maybe I need to release those and release my grip and to give. We have a need, a deep need in our bones to give. So whatever that may be, we have a need for it. See, this parable is like a mirror. It's held up for us so that we might see and recognize in ourselves what Jesus recognizes. God trusts us. Isn't that incredible? Have you ever thought about that? That God trusts us. He sees something beautiful and good. See, this wasn't told to condemn, but to set us free from that place of fear and grasping and selfishness and greed and all that little small private vineyards we have, to call us back into life, to open us to God's grateful abundance. So I ask this, what if we've settled for living outside the kingdom? Like those tenants in the vineyard in this story. What if all of our grasping and clinging that we see in our own lives and in this world, what if we've missed the vineyard life? The joy of living in the vineyard, the joy of the fruit of the wine of God, of the life of God. What if we've missed it? What if what Jesus said today is true? What if Jesus was right? That everything that we are, time itself, all that we see are gifts. What if everything really has been entrusted to us by God? And like the tenants, we're just privileged. We're just privileged that God trusts us. What if we've been set free to live in the vineyard and to share the vineyard fruit with all people and everyone? And it's not really just about my corner of the vineyard. What if Jesus is right? What if the people and relationships and circumstances of our lives, our families, our work, our money, our choices, our talents, our hopes, our dreams, and the circumstances are vineyards God has entrusted to us, intended to reveal the presence and life of God? What if it's not about me? And then I can open my heart to, and my hands, and my life to this profound vineyard life. What if Jesus got it right? What if it's what we're reading today is actually true? That this is all created by God, entrusted to us to produce the fruits of the kingdom that we were created to live in, the vineyard fruit, love and joy and peace and kindness and justice and mercy and compassion and forgiveness and reconciliation. What if Jesus was right and what he said is true, that we really are created for the vineyard life? What if God does really love us without limit, that without condition? What if we really are forgiven? What if God really has restored us? What if God has really reconciled us through Jesus Christ and we're promised life with God in the here, in the now, and forever? What if that's true? What if Jesus actually was right? What if God wants us, that love and that life, to overflow in us and through us, and to reach out our hands in love to one another, to all people, to everyone, without condition and without limit? What if this vineyard Jesus was talking about is real? What if Jesus was right? What if God has given St. Michael's everything that we need to accomplish what God wants to accomplish in and through us? What if this is kind of a little vineyard here, God's vineyard in College Park? What if that's true? What if God is inviting us to invest our lives, our blessings, if you will, our resources into what God is doing? What if God really has invited us into something good and beautiful, like this vineyard, and a life beyond our wildest expectations and imaginations? What if Jesus got it right? What if it's true? How would you respond? What would you do? Would you open the gates of the kingdom of the vineyard? What would you do? I happen to believe that Jesus is a little more enlightened than me. And I think this is what Jesus is getting to today. This is a truth. That, we were created to have life with God. And we do grasp and we cling and we clutch and we hold on to and we fight, and we don't like it. And he's saying, God has put you in the vineyard. Awaken to that truth and that reality. Open your hearts. Open your minds. Wake up. Because just like those tenants, when we do that, we step outside the vineyard. And he wants to invite us back in. What if it's true? And what if he was right? What would you do? Amen.